Thank you for the introduction. So Professor Tosa just talked about the cultural computing. She focused on Japan, and she applied this concept to the Japanese culture and arts, and tried to, explain in detail how things could be put on the computer, and it sounded interesting. But at the same time, I could see how challenging this could be. If we're really going to do this, this is going to be involving a lot of work and effort, I imagine. And my mission today is, I think, what I am to do is that, we just heard about the Japanese arts, but if we just focus on the Japanese arts, the story won't end there. So my job is to widen the view and also touch upon how this kind of concept can be applied to overseas culture as well. But actually, according to the original schedule, my time is almost up, and but I couldn't just say, okay, I will speak next time. But how many minutes would I have? Because I couldn't finish now. It'll be too short. So, but I think that I have to keep the time for the following schedule. Well, we're scheduling for 1 hour for each session, so we can shorten the break time. So 25 minutes? Yes. Okay, that'll be fine for me. So the theme is just as I mentioned. So culture so far has been region or ethnic group specific phenomenon. So Japanese culture was thought to be unique of Japan, but that was the conventional way of thinking. But is this true? Because if that is the case, cultural computing that is applied in the Japanese culture cannot be applied to non-Japanese culture. So that would be an issue, and cultural computing then would be just country specific. But that will not be acceptable. So this is just a hypothesis, or assumption, and data is probably cultural dependent. But here I call it algorithm. Dr. Tosa is saying kata or pattern, but that part, algorithm, is cultural independent, is my assumption. I don't have the clear-cut answer, but I just want to deepen the thought, and that will be the theme of my lecture today. And now just kind of skipping around. We say that human spirit consists of logic and sensitivity, and if that is the case, culture is more closely related to the sensitivity or the pathotic aspect of human spirit. Then I call it pathos. So then the next question is pathos specific to certain human race or certain ethnic group. We need to consider that. And now I made another leap and talking about Plato. Logos and pathos was the word that Plato started to use. He described the human spirit as a human having a carriage with 2 horses and 1 coach driver. And I like this analogy, so I'm using it here. And this coach driver is the logos part of human. And so the horses is the passion, the desire, the sensitivity of the humans, the pathos part. And there's, in the pathos, according to Plato, has both the positive side and the negative side. And logos, the intellectual part of human, for the human, this is most important, is what Plato is saying. And the pathos part, it's divided into 2 parts, the positive and the negative, and the passion. Well, Japanese people, maybe sensitivity or kansei may be the better word, but this passion was admired as the source of humans' creativeness. But the negative part is the desire. Desire is something that needs to be controlled, and this is what is also said in Buddhism as well. And maybe digressing a little bit, the appetite is at the core of human desire. And in that sense, this desire is to be controlled, is what is said. People say you have to control your desire, but for example, in Japan, eating meals, food has been improved and to be something very delicate within the Japanese culture. And in the panel discussion, I think this culinary culture, I think, will be part of the discussion. Looking forward to that. But what Plato is saying is the passion and the logos together needs to control the desire, and that is the way the human spirit can function in the sound way. If that is the case, the culture it will be applying to the passion part, the positive part of pathos, is what I think we can say. And now we're talking about art. It could be also applied to non-Japanese overseas art and also old art as well. So pathos fundamentally, I think, is shared by all humans. This, I think, one conclusion that we can say. But on the other hand, there are many regions, countries, and different races, and each have their own unique culture. Each are different, and maybe that's because the way the embodiment of the pathos is affected by the difference in the countries or the regions or the races is. And so, in other words, culture is embodiment of pathos, is what we can say, which is influenced by the climate of each region. But if we say that cultural computing, what we had been discussing, this cultural computing can be a concept that can be applied not only to Japanese culture, but can it be applied to overseas culture? And we can hypothesize or assume that that is actually possible. And from now on, this is something that I haven't really worked on really deeply, but this is just based on my past experience. The key points is cultural computing is, for example, how can we use this? One is to find out or identify the similarity among the different cultures, like the types, the models. Maybe we can identify the different among the different cultures, and by doing so, we can deepen the understanding of other cultures. And furthermore, we can make comparative studies among different cultures, applying the cultural computing. Or also, we could do the translation. Maybe that is also possible. But if we just stop here, then cultural computing will only be looking at the past. But so therefore, my hope is that this is what was mentioned in Professor Tanaka's lecture, and I really supported this view, meaning that how will culture change in the future? The current culture, as was mentioned, that's the embodiment of our culture. And of course, different conditions will affect this. So there will be different forms of culture. And as for the future of culture, I think cultural computing has a role to play in anticipating the future culture. And so in that sense, cultural computing can play a significant role. Now, here, just simply, this is really just based on my narrow knowledge, but just want to share with you the comparison or between Japanese and overseas culture, and also to identify the similarities in old culture and present culture. So similarities between Japanese and foreign cultures and old and present cultures, what I would like to present as an example. One example would be, this is the Iliad, said to be written by Homer, and this is the epic on the War of Troy, and in case of Japan, there's the tale of Heike. So my Nakatsu family has a deep relationship with the family of Heike. The Heike family is what they say, what is said. So I really have a feeling for this family. So the similarity between the two tales is that both is dealing with the fights, like battle and the duel, and also the armors and the weapons are described in a very detailed manner for both pieces of work. And what I like more is that in Tale of Heike, the way there is this for Troy and for the Tale of Heike, there is this transient, the impermanence, both deal with that, and I really like that they know they're destined to fall. So this view of life and death, or transiency, is what I appreciate. And he wrote, this is not only for Greek, but myths all have similarity. So Greek myth and Japanese myth, if we compare the two myths, well, after this, in the panel discussion, maybe this discussion will come about the monotheism. And so in the past, I think it's interesting that all used to be polytheist, but in any case, for Greek myth and Japanese myth, there are multiple gods appearing. And another thing, I started Twitter, and I come to realize that Tale of Genji and the current way of communication, I think, has many similarities. In the Tale of Genji, I think many of you are familiar that the hero and the heroines frequently exchange the Japanese short poem, the waka. And the following day, after the men sleep over at the women's house, they exchange the waka. And if we read further, it seems that before and after this, the men and the women meet and spend the time together. They exchange these waka, and so it's like a Twitter. The current in the current communication world, it's like a Twitter. Waka is very short, so it's like the way we communicate today, and people frequently Twitter, so it's similar. And also, I think there's a similarity between the Greek society and the present society, the network society. We now live in a network society, is what people say, and what network society means that the people, everybody's networked, share the information, and we have a lot of discussion, and it's not top down, but things are decided by or through the discussion amongst the members of the society, and that's what happened in Greek. And of course, the scales could have been smaller, but in the city-state of Greek, people got together and discussed and made decisions. So I think we can see the similarity. So in the Greek culture and the present culture is, well, of course, there's a difference in the way whether now we have the network, so that may be different, but there's some similarities. And No and Shakespeare play, well, the similarity, again, Professor Tosa explained about the No theater stage. Then there's the Globe Theater for Shakespeare play. Shakespeare's Globe Theater really expresses the world, and there's no decoration or anything, and the character has to say, I'm here, I'm in this place. And only after that, the audience will use their imagination to imagine where the scene is taking place. And that's similar to No. And there's the play within a play. So within the play, there's another play intertwined. So that's the similarity between No and the Shakespeare. So from that perspective, Greek tragedy and No and Kabuki is similar. Back chorus does the narration, and the actors and the players act in front of the chorus, so similar. And this is, well, for comparative studies, people, maybe this is my own view, but why equal fx? Y is what people really speak, their public view, especially Kyoto people will apply this function, expression function, and so they will try to conceal what they really think, and they make their official statement. So people, the listener, would have to calculate backwards to imagine what the person is really thinking, especially the people in Kyoto has this complexity of F factor or the function is considered proportional to the intellectuality of the person, intellectual level of the person. But surprisingly, in Tokyo or New York, F equals 1, meaning people say what they really feel. So that's quite surprising for us in Kyoto. Maybe this is my dogmatic view, but the difference between culture in Tokyo and Kyoto is maybe bigger than the difference of culture between Kyoto and New York, is what I feel. Lastly, so far, I have been just reflecting the past, talking about what has taken place in the past. But as I said at the beginning, well, we also need to think about the future. And again, this is based on my own personal view. But I just want to finish up by talking about the future. This, I think, I think you shared this with me. Human behaviors are changing rapidly due to the networking. And in my expression, I said that the logos and pathos are approaching together again and are being integrated once again. This is what I think. Especially in the Western history, we see that the logos and the pathos the effort has been made to separate the two. And so the Western civilization is developed by focusing on the logos, but for the pathos has been creating art because it derives the human people's creativity. So passion was appreciated as part of the pathos, whereas the instinctive desire has been neglected or was sought to be controlled. Now, logos has been related to the formal or public aspect of our activities, whereas the pathos has been more, it has to do with our sensitivity or senses, so it has more related to the private aspect of our activities, private life, private behavior. So this is, in Japanese, is honne and tatemae. So in the East, we don't really divide the logos and pathos so clearly. It was all intermingled. It was all mixed together. And so that's why the Western people say that we tend to, we don't feel what we really, what we say is different from what we really feel. But I think it's not that we're hiding our true intent, but it's more that the both are mixed together, and that's why this confusion arises. But in the West, logos has been separated from the pathos in the past. But I think even in the Western countries, there's a major difference, at least from my eyes. This is true of Japanese, but there's many changes in that behavior. The camera, people who were using the camera, Japanese people were known to use a lot of camera and shooting picture everywhere. But now, when you go to tourist sites, the Westerners are also taking photos everywhere with their families and friends, and you can see this anywhere now. And during this conference, I think majority of the participants listen, but at the same time listen to the lecture. But at the same time, I think you are using your mobile phone to check if there's some messages arriving in your phones. So people want to communicate, always want to communicate, even if they're in the public places, and that's what the recent trend that we see. And so emailing, using the mobile phone to send messages, text messages, is really a kind of confusing or intermingling the public activities with the private activities. So in the long history of the Western world, it's kind of, well, not exactly maybe forbidden, but I think the Western history is about trying to separate the public from the private, but now it's all happening together, so it's quite interesting. So in the past, logos and pathos were together, but from the days of Plato in the Greek times, there's an effort made to separate the logos and pathos, and priority was given to logos. I think that was the Western way of thinking, but once again today the logos and the pathos are approaching together, and now they're even being integrated into one, is what we recognize. And what would happen, one way of thinking is the Western people's behavior pattern and Eastern people's behaviors maybe approaching, and this is actually happening because, for example, at the conference, Japanese, including the Japanese, the Asians' behaviors and the Western people's behaviors are really similar. Looking at the text message with the mobile phone, for example, and not so much difference. And so, if we try to make it more universal, maybe our behaviors are going back to those of ancient era. Maybe when humans were like monkeys, so where the logos and pathos were all together, and maybe, of course, things shouldn't be that way. But how to cope with this current trend may be a challenge. Logos and pathos, they are approaching, and as a result, the behavior between the Westerners and Easterners is being similar, and that's part of globalization. When we say globalization, I think the globalization also includes the fact that the logos and pathos is approaching and merging. So in the past, logos and pathos were clearly distinct, separated, but now once again it's being approaching. Then maybe 21st century might become an era of chaos, chaotic era, and this chaotic era is already starting with this war in Iraq, or what's happening in Afghanistan, and the 9/11 terrorist attacks. We don't know what's going to happen, unpredictable. So era of chaos is maybe already starting. If that is the case, well, it is becoming increasingly difficult to anticipate a future, and so that's why the futurism, or the study on future is not so popular. I mean, there's not so many popular books talking about the future. Of course, there are people who are studying on the future, but I think it's just difficult to predict the future. So, and that is because I think the logos and pathos of human behavior is being increasingly merged. Then what would be happening? Well, with this logos and pathos being together, the philosopher like Plato was trying to separate the two. So maybe we need to recall this fact of applying control, like in Greek, during the days of Homer, when logos and pathos were together. Well, in Japan, it would be later in time, Tales of Genji days. So maybe we are returning to those days, Homer's literature days or Tales of Genji days. So young people are using Twitter and blog, and majority of the day there are young people are spending majority of the time during the day communicating with each other. So such things are happening already. So this is just my image of our future. Logos and pathos are we're going back to the Tales of Genji days when the logos and pathos were together. So that's, in a negative way, it was the days when the reason and the emotions were not able to separate, but people were enjoying their life, a luxury life, exchanging the poems. And so with the IT network, Twitter, blog, using these technology, maybe people, if we can spend the days like the people of the Heian era, that's one way of lifestyle for the future. So I think that's suitable for Japanese, that's suited to the Japanese people. And actually, this era is maybe already starting, not exactly in this form, but we're seeing such a trend. So if we're going to deal with this topic or this kind of a research, I think cultural computing will be interesting. So I would like to further my research or studies into this field. This is my final word, and with this I'd like to close. Thank you.